Thank you again, everyone, for coming out. We appreciate it. Thank you. We're going to focus this panel discussion on just risk awareness and then mitigation, right? And how do you mitigate if you're not first aware of what that risk is? So that's going to be the theme of this panel. I'll start with Mark. Quick introductions, 30 seconds on what we do, and then we'll get started.
Awesome. Hello, everyone. My name is Mark Ayotte from Calero. We are a technology expense management software. So think telecom, mobility, and SaaS management.
Mike Dietze, managing partner with Accelerate. We are a technical advisory firm. We work with Prelude, our specialty. Myself and my two partners, we all come from managed IT, cyber, cloud companies. So we specialize in those areas, and we work with Prelude to bring solutions to their clients.
Hi everyone, I'm Johnston. I'm a partner at Wipfli. Most of you might have heard of Wipfli. We're a top 25 accounting and advisory firm. I am one of the leaders in our risk advisory services practice, and what that means is we do a lot of different security and privacy related audits and cybersecurity. So I think that's why I was invited to the panel. Just a little bit of a different perspective from the audit side. And I have to say, I've never done a panel twice in a row, so that was really enjoyable to watch you reintroduce the same thing. The first time you said it.
I was like, you made all the mistakes in the last
Yeah.
This one's going to be really good.
We usually have a summary, so we don't really need it anymore.
Guys are for something really special.
Yeah, I got through all the mistakes in the first one. Start with Mark. Main panel, Mike Backdorf spoke about where Prelude finds unused services, things on those lines with an audit review. Can you just expand on that a little bit with what your platform does?
Yeah.
And where there's risk.
For sure. So hot topic of conversation today, right? But for us, we're always amazed kind of with organizations of all sizes with the lack of visibility or control they have on their SaaS applications as a whole internally, right? They don't know what applications they've got. They don't know who the internal stakeholder is in terms of purchasing those applications, and they have no idea from a license perspective who's got one. So that definitely opens up the door for risk, especially in the SaaS estate. Shadow IT is really a big place that we see that a lot, right? So a company employee going out, purchasing an application that's unsanctioned by the business. Maybe there's a corporate credit card that they're utilizing. What if an angry employee gets in there, gets access to that credit card information? And then from an organizational perspective too, what's that reputational risk as that data gets leaked out the back, right? So it's something you can't put a dollar amount on. It's a really big cause of concern, right? So what we're seeing, and I think wholly over the course of the last 2 to 3 years, from that SaaS specific perspective, that SaaS sprawl has really outpaced governance for SaaS applications, and then creating organizations that don't know what necessarily to do with it or how to manage it effectively. So it's creating a lot of waste, we'll call, right, as a result of that. So now that you're talking real dollars that you could have elsewhere within the organization, but you're overspending on licenses that maybe aren't used or underutilized as a result of all that. So I think from a technology spend perspective, from a SaaS spend perspective today, having visibility is not just something that's a great tool to have, it's actually an essential tool to have to run it and manage it effectively.
I'm going to ask you to comment in a minute if you don't mind. But what Mike Backdorf, when the first panel spoke about that Mark's referring to is, what we find when we do an assessment is internet connections that they weren't aware of, right? You have one location, there's 4 connections, right? Are all 4 active, or was one an upgrade 3 years ago, legacy not still connected, but billing maybe not changed? Or is that active, is that connection still active? You, in the last session, you made the comment about MGM. So do you want to make that comment? Because that's a great example of where there's risk from, unaware services, so to speak.
Yeah, shadow IT, right? I think the pandemic blew up shadow IT. Everybody had to go home, and they brought their own tools with them that they thought they needed. And so what we're seeing with audits like this, all these rogue applications that are on your network that are causing risk. The other thing is these devices, right? They're everywhere. Best thing that ever happened to us because we're always connected. Worst thing that ever happened to us because we're always connected. Anybody know how MGM got hacked last year? Anybody know how that happened? They had an aquarium, and there was a sensor in the aquarium, no password on it, hooked up to the corporate Wi-Fi. You hacked the sensor, it took you to the corporate Wi-Fi, $500 million later, MGM paid, right? So it's that, we talked about shadow IT a little bit in the last round, it's all these Wi-Fi devices and mobile phones that come onto your network. How do you protect yourself against those? So it's, I mean, it'll drive you crazy if you think too much about it, but we have some wonderful, Mike will talk more about this, third-party providers where that's all they think about.
So, thanks, Mike. Mike Dietze, SOC, MDR, incident response, SIMSAM, right? That whole world. Balance of internal expertise, managing the internal security stack versus third party.
Sure.
Can you just comment on that a little bit, please?
So yeah, I mean, if you have tools in place and you're an IT professional, you're running your infrastructure and you want to manage your tools, sure, manage your tools, right? But what we find is, the most important thing is really, 24/7 monitoring. And most organizations don't have the capability to do true 24/7 monitoring on their own. And I mean, look, it's from small to, like, if you're under 1,000 employees, right, you probably aren't staffed for that, because you need to cover 24/7, 365. You need to cover for vacations, sick days, people who get, someone offers them more money. I don't know if you guys know this, but other countries don't celebrate the 4th of July like we do. Did anybody know that? It's just July, like in Eastern Europe and Southeast Asia, it's just July 4th. It's not the 4th of July, right? So the hackers are hard at work while we're, celebrating holidays, Thanksgiving, any holiday, right? The hackers are working 24/7, 365. They're using AI, they're using scanners, they're using automated tools. So having 24/7, 365 monitoring at the very least, right? My cousin, he's retired now, but he was the CISO of Quest Diagnostics. Before that, he was the CISO of ADP. And that was the first thing he did back in 2010, was take the 10 people that were doing his monitoring. Again, there's a lot more to monitor now than there was in 2010, right? More tools, more telemetry. But even back then, it was the first thing he did. And the two reasons: one was managing the personnel, like I mentioned before. And the second was, when you're managing or you're monitoring your own, you're only looking at the world through that one keyhole. You only see what tries to come through your door. When you're outsourcing it to a third party, they're getting telemetry, they're getting information from thousands of devices, thousands of customers. Sometimes the bigger they are, the better it can be, as long as they're not too big that they're providing bad service, right? But like, some of those bigger companies get so much telemetry that if you're in healthcare and they have other healthcare clients, they're identifying fill in the blank, right? Healthcare, legal, financial, whatever it is. But they're looking at, hey, here's something new that's impacting a system that's very heavily used inside of this particular industry. Let's get an update out to all of our clients and make them aware. Or maybe it's just something general, right? Like, hey, we know we have a lot of clients using Fortinet, right? And we just found out that here was this exploit. Even if we're not managing the Fortinet, it's just the awareness. You don't have to use an MSSP that does your managed IT necessarily. You just have to use a company that's at the very least letting you know, because you're not looking at your phone, at 3 o'clock in the morning on New Year's Eve, or 4 o'clock in the afternoon on 4th of July. So it's one of the first things we recommend is really, you've got to have 24/7 eyes on glass for all your cyber. You want to do the tools, the other stuff internally. I mean, that's a business decision, that's a budget decision, that's a risk quantification decision, right? But at the very least, the monitoring.
A little bit of a pivot, but Karen, you're an auditor by trade, right? So can you just speak a little bit about, from an auditor's perspective, how you would view what Mike just talked about, which is in-house versus third party? Are you working against a known framework, and are you following best practices if you don't have some of the things that Mike just spoke about?
Yeah, absolutely. So, there's pros and cons to both decisions, whether to keep it in-house or outsourced. I would say that we find those that are more prepared and more secured have, at the very least, a hybrid environment that is not all in-house. I mean, no matter what, the organization owns their security program. So they have to have somebody that owns that and is responsible for it. But if you have somebody that's full, if you have a full in-house security team, what we often see is they're not as well versed and trained as, you know, a third party might be, because they only know what they know and they have their day job and they have full responsibilities. Where the third party, they have to be up to date on the new trends and what's out there in the landscape of security and how to combat and have the right controls for their organizations. Plus, they see a lot of different clients. And so they see best practices, they see what's not working, and they know when, this didn't work for one organization, so I'm gonna fix it really quick because I don't wanna make that mistake twice. So they're really improving from what they're learning from your, you know, other clients. So you're benefiting from their work with other clients. There also is this side with internal, when you have an internal, they do have a deeper expertise of the business, and that can be really good for a security professional, but it can also be a hindrance because they might, like you said, just be looking at it from like one perspective, not widely overall about what's going on out there in the landscape. You mentioned something about a framework. So I think again, we were talking about this before, but you know, it's really important to understand your the various authoritative sources, regulations, and that you're on the hook for based on the industry that you're in. So what we're seeing is that sometimes you need that third party that specializes in healthcare that can kind of make, or financial services, or again, you name the industry, that can help you understand that you have to have certain types of controls in place in order to meet the different authoritative sources that you're, and regulatory factors that you're on the hook for. So it's really important that you look at that full landscape, understand all the products that you have, understand the customers and where those customers are, so that you're meeting that and that you're building that into your overall security program.
Any questions?
Anybody work for the federal government, or your company works with the federal government where you need to be CMMC compliant? We've seen that quite a bit.
Yep.
We're starting to work with more and more governments, government entities, and adjacent companies to that. And you know,
All the subcontractors.
Yes.
We're doing a lot.
yeah.
Even if you want to work with the VA, then you need FedRAMP. If you want to, you know, work with healthcare, you need HIPAA and high trust. It really just depends on. If you have customers in the EU, now GDPR comes into effect.
Yeah.
If you have customers in California, then suddenly CCPA. So that's what's really important to understand. That full.
Keeps you guys busy. Huh? It's a good business to be in.
It keeps me very gainfully employed.
And if you,
Sorry, I was gonna say, we are working with a client who is about to look at how to upgrade, or not upgrade, go from CMMC 1 to 2,
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
and trying to figure out what platforms are the right platforms. They're currently on LifeRay. They're trying to figure out, do we go to a different instance from LifeRay? Do we go to Salesforce or not? And so all of that evaluation is something we need to partner with someone with who does that CMMC 2.0
Yeah.
certification. And is it true that there's only about 80 some
There's very
companies
yeah,
in the
so I'm
US that do that?
currently working with an MSP. They're MSP, MSSP, that they themselves are CMMC2 certified.
Okay.
So they offer MSP, MSSP, and they offer compliance as a service. So they come in and do all this. And there are very few. I can't think of the acronym right through. I almost said
It's not C3PO.
It's not. It's not. You know where I was going though, right?
Something, yeah.
Oh wait, now
All right, we're stopping. Let's move
I know
on.
what you mean,
You know what I'm talking
yes.
about. There's an acronym in there. It's
Yes.
not R2D2 and it's not C3PO, but it's something similar to that.
But there's only 80 some of them apparently.
There's a very limited number. So it is a huge challenge right now. The self-assessment goes into effect this summer, and the certification is coming next year. So if you look at a life cycle of defense contractor, the contracts they're bidding on now, they have to be certified
Right.
by the time they fulfill that contract. So we'll connect, but I definitely have some. I'm actually consulting directly with that company right now to help build out their channel program.
Okay.
So we have a very good relationship with one in particular, and I'm happy to make an
Okay,
introduction.
thanks.
It's C3PAO is what you're talking about.
C3PAO. I was so close.
I was close to that.
I believe you were closer, yes.
and whether it's CMCC, you know, Karen mentioned HIPAA, high trust, but just even if you're not required to follow that compliance, the value of following the best practices within the framework
Yeah,
of one
every
of those.
program, all of us should have information security management programs, and in there, we should say what our framework was built upon. So what framework out there, and it can be any of them, and it's just ones that make sense for your business, but call that out immediately, and then ensure that you're doing regular assessments against it.
Should we all say CMMC and C3PAO 3 times?
Yeah. You can do a lot more acronyms.
Yeah.
Yeah, but just on your point though, like if you're not bound to a regulatory body, the standard ones are CIS 18, NIST, ISO.
Right.
Have a framework, use an auditor, just have something, because we're seeing more and more that customers are being asked by their customers. We saw a trucking company that was selling to Nike, and Nike wanted to know what they had in place, because Nike's like, wait a second, you guys get hacked and go down, my product does not get delivered from your warehouse to the store. So like, you think about the level that whatever you do, your customers at some point may be asking you. So if you're not bound to a regulatory body that you have to be HIPAA, HITRUST, CMMC, SEC, you want to consider having a framework that you build your business upon.
And even consider if you have a breach, like that's one of when the auditors come in, the federal auditors, to see what happened, they're looking to see that you had a framework, that you built your program against.
Yep, that's one of the things we've talked about before, Karen, is a defensible position,
Yeah.
right? So if you are following a framework and something happens, your posture is defensible, right? If you're not following the best practices of the framework, you don't have a defense, right? And High Trust had that, the third-party risk management aspect of it, right? Same thing that Mike's referring to there. You mentioned MGM, Target's breach was from their HVAC company, like 7, 8 years ago, whatever that was, right? So that's part of that third-party, fourth-party, that supply chain risk management is really, really important.
Yeah, you have to know where your data is going and the downstream effects. So if you're using a vendor for some type of analytics or plug-in X, whatever service it is, you have to know where they're also sharing your data.
Questions, comments, any thoughts?
How do we protect our employees? Are there some best practices from social phishing or smishing or vishing or whatever issue?
Unplug all their computers. That's the safest way to use the internet. Don't use the internet.
Don't even use it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, every company, any framework is going to have a recommendation for security awareness training, phishing, right? Phishing has gotten really, really good. Not phishing, phishing, email phishing, right? So having, doing simulations, doing tests, like, I mean, that's a basic tenet. Like, if for the folks in this room, I'm sure you know this, but like, if you're not getting the budget approval for that, that is a huge risk factor, because even the smart employees will get tricked.
How about elderly parents? How do we protect our elderly parents?
Elderly, yeah.
Yeah.
Even more reason to unplug.
We
So-
bundle the phishing simulation in with our offering now,
Yeah,
where we used to charge for it. Now it's just bundled in.
Yeah, it's all standard now, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
so one of Mikey B's associates, Jason Stein, has a decal on his computer, makes me think of my mom, because it says, "Show me that link you didn't click on." Right, so we're all in that situation. When I saw that on his computer, I just busted out laughing, because my son or my wife once every other week have to help my mom, but show me what you didn't click on. Oh, it's right here.
I don't understand how I ended up having to help the people older than me and younger than me.
Uh-huh.
I want to know when someone's gonna help me.
Yeah.
It's coming.
Other risk, right, awareness. So Mark and I have a client, it's Prelude's client, Mark's, well, actually no, they're a joint client because you have other services there. Going through a pilot right now for SaaS licenses, right? 4,500 people, 5 people a week, it's a utility, 5 people a week get together every Wednesday and look at a spreadsheet of SaaS licenses to try and identify who's not here, what licenses are inactive, so on and so forth. Can you just talk a little bit more about that? Because I think that's a core area of risk.
Yeah, for sure, because it is. I mean, you can't manage what you can't see, which is, I stole that from one of our solutions consultants, to be full transparent with you guys. But that's what our platform does, right? So it's gonna dig into the SaaS applications for a company. It's gonna we're gonna set policies with you together, right? If it's out of folks that are leavers or have left the organization, or low usage users, and you get to kind of define what that means for your organization in and of itself. But And right away, you're gonna be able to see, all right, here's 10 people out of the gate that are no longer with the organization, haven't been here in months, boom, their savings right out of the gate. Oh, here's another 10 that haven't used, X license in 30 to 60 days. All right, we'll get rid of that license for them as well and put it in our spare pool for new employees coming in the door. It at least helps you organizationally manage. If you've got new employees come in, you don't always need to order up additional licenses. You've already got them, right? So, but I think the platform that Calero has is shedding some light on that, so you can actually see it, control it, and manage it effectively.
And from a cost perspective, you touched upon it, put these licenses in, a to-be-used category.
Yeah.
You said it more eloquently. But then often you see people ordering new licenses.
Exactly.
Right? So they have X amount of, Ayotte licenses and then they order new ones.
Yeah.
Right, so that's not necessarily a security risk, but that's a
Sure,
cost,
yeah.
that's a cost
Yeah.
scenario. Security stack, show of hands, 100% internal, 100% external, just, hybrid was my next one, right? So you're 50-50. Anybody else? Charleston, you know what you guys are?
We are 100% internal.
100% internal, right? So there's a debate, right? You're 50-50, you're 100% internal. Now you're also a significantly larger organization, and you also staff, so that helps, right? But can you, Mike, just a little bit more on, that approach of the complement to the internal, right? So Brian, as an example, 50-50, right? Where third parties and an organization like you, like us, can help evaluate the market. People like Mark, people like Rick, people like us,
so
help evaluate the market of who are the right providers to utilize.
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, it's being able to audit and quantify your risk, right? So there's auditors that can come in and do it and help. There's also tools out there. There's one that we've been getting a lot of success with, or really been providing a lot of value to our customers, that does actual cyber risk quantification. So it takes your tools, it takes telemetry from your tools, you put all the data in, it learns things like your revenue, your EBITDA, your number of servers, your employees, your knowledge employees, et cetera, and then it spits out a score, which also includes your third-party risk validation, your audit, your controls, takes everything, and then it assigns a cyber risk score, and then ties that back to, based on how it got there, what is your quantifiable cyber risk? So understanding what your quantifiable risk is super important, not just for understanding the business, but also for understanding things like, how much cyber insurance do I have, right? Why 100 million? I have 100 million. Well, why? Well, I don't know. Insurance guy came in and said 100 million was a good number. Round number, made me feel good, right? 100 million, that sounds good, right? Make it a bill, I don't know. But so actually being able to quantify that, and then looking back to and saying, well, if I'm not scoring where I need to be, if my score is coming in lower, meaning my risk is higher, so my quantifiable risk is higher, now I have a decision to make. Am I willing to invest more in cybersecurity? Which usually means not that people can't do it internally. It's not that it's impossible, but typically we see the scores are better when there is a third party that really specializes in that function, right? They're not to say you need to outsource the whole thing necessarily. If you're a big company, I told this in the last panel, buddy of mine, global manufacturing company, he was just bragging that he hired a cyber analyst in Mexico City for $60,000 a year. I'm like, cool. I don't know how comfortable I would feel with hiring a cyber analyst in Mexico City for $60,000 a year, but good for you. I mean, congratulations, right? So if that, but there's risk that you're taking on in the business when you're completely insourced, right? Because what if person A gets sick, person B goes on leave, person C gets another job offer, and so now there's risk in the business. So all that goes into understanding and quantifying your risk factor, and then from an IT perspective, when you can show that to the executives, because they're the one who's on the line, right? The CEO needs to stand up there in front of the board and say, I understood the risk and we got hacked anyway. So having these tools and being able to quantify and then making decisions on how much should I be doing myself versus how much should I be outsourcing. Not because you can't do it yourself, just because you choose not to. Right, that maybe, I have the physical capability to cut my grass. I just know that the company that comes by every Thursday does a much better job than I do. And I just don't feel like cutting my grass.
And we also talked about in the last panel, what Mike was just referring to is there's a fiduciary responsibility that people have to the business, right? And cybersecurity, cyber insurance is not an IT function, and it's not a security function, right? It's a business function, right? The entire C-suite has to be bought in on this is what our exposure is, this is what our insurance covers, this is what we self-insure, so to speak. This is our risk that we accept, right? And that's we mentioned this is somewhat of a CYA, right? You're protecting yourself by having the C-suite and the executives understand, the board, understand where the risk is, and they have to either accept it or do other things to mitigate it, whether it's tools or it's insurance or something else.
Yeah, we were also talking about the last panel about a lot of organizations are like, it's not gonna happen to me, it's not gonna happen to me, or they don't feel the threats that are out there as strong as maybe they should. And then suddenly the breach happens, and then suddenly probably all of our conversations spike because that threat happens and it becomes more of a reality that it could hit them. So our jobs, I feel, is trying to instill the right amount of importance, I don't wanna say fear, to the executives and some studies show that, if you ask a CEO what keeps them up at night, it's the threat of a breach, like that scares them, and I think that it depends on when you ask them, like right after a huge breach, everybody's pretty worried, but unfortunately, just like everything, time heals all wounds, and people, it fades a little bit, and then it might be you, and inevitably, every organization has a threat of being hacked. It's gonna happen at some point, so it's just really important that you hold on to that and you build out the right controls to protect yourself.
Couple more minutes stand between us and a drink and a few appetizers, so we're gonna wrap up in a moment. Karen, again, auditor by trade, right? Can you just share a couple thoughts, comments, ideas on here's areas of hidden risk? Here's areas that people don't necessarily think about or aren't, driving towards when it comes to uncovering where we have risk.
Yeah, honestly, there's a few areas. The one area we see a lot of is organizations don't know who has their full universe of the products that are being used within their organization, and then who has access to them and how it's being controlled. So if you're not doing a regular review, so user access review is what we call it, of all of your SaaS products and all of your internally developed products, and who has access to them, ensuring that if there's a big organizational change, and say you just had a new merger, an acquisition, and divestiture of one of your organizations, that you're looking to make sure that the access rights have been updated appropriately. That's an area we find quite a bit in our audits, and I mean, we just all talked about it. That's one of our biggest risks to having that breach is, credentials that shouldn't be available are still open. We use, a lot of organizations use third parties. You sometimes move on to the next third party. Have you made sure that you disable those user accounts? So those are some. The other side is the resiliency side. People don't like to write policies, but have to. So they write plans and incident response plans, disaster recovery, business continuity. But are you really testing them? Do they even make sense for your organization? And so that's another area that we see is that they have these pretty binders with, now the virtual binders, with the plans in there, but they haven't done anything with them. And every year they update them and just tweak and add like a new vendor maybe to it. But are they really practical and operational in your business? I'd say they were the main ones.
And what Karen references what you were speaking to earlier, which is those credentials and licenses that are not in use, terminated employees, one way or another, are exposure. Questions, thoughts, comments?
So you just mentioned kind of running through that process, things like an incident response type of situation, right? You have the playbook, but you never run through it until it's real. How do you go through practice?
So usually you schedule and you organize a tabletop exercise. So you get the right members of, you should have a response team, a team developed for each of your plans, and then at least on an annual basis, usually twice a year, you go through that plan and you create an example of what it would look like. This went down, somebody hacked into this server, this location's no longer available, people have to work from home suddenly, and then you run out, you live out that scenario. And At the end of that, you wanna document your results, you wanna talk through lessons learned, and then you update policy and procedures accordingly, and then, next time go, you run through the new version of it.
And we talked earlier about a defensible position, right? So not testing that plan for 3 years is not defensible.
Yes.
Testing it every year and making tweaks is not only defensible, it's very responsible.
Yes, and again, if you were to have a breach and later the regulators come in and look at your practices, they're gonna say, show me your evidence of your tabletop exercises. Show me what you did afterwards with the lessons learned. How did you update things? Because they wanna see breaches are gonna happen even with the best practices in place, but did you do your best to try and protect yourself from it?
And we spoke about this years ago, but the difference between like HIPAA and high trust is this, right? HIPAA is very reactive. You look back and make a judgment of what happened versus high trust where you certify that you have certain controls in place. So again, following that framework and being able to, attest against it is important.
And having the executive buy-in on that too, I had a customer that the VP of IT was fired after their servers failed their backspace. Like he told them they needed more DR, he'd been telling them, but didn't have the buy-in, didn't have it documented. They ended up going down on, there was an issue with their production, they didn't have enough DR, it was their busiest time, it was a perfect storm. It was the busiest time of the year, the backup that they had built out could not handle the load, and 3 weeks later he lost his job. Right, so having really making sure that the leadership understands, if we're not testing this, if we don't prove that it fails, then we have a business risk, and that's why it's important to test those plans. Not in the middle of a fire, right? You don't test it while you're having a disaster. You test it before you have a disaster.
First insurance company was created by Ben Franklin during a disaster because he owned the fire company. You want to put out your fire? Here, buy this insurance. That's how insurance started. The man was a genius. All right, so we're probably a minute over. Any last questions, comments, thoughts, opinions? Well, thank you everyone for joining. Thank you for.